In the 1950s and 1960s, the United States was mired in a regime of racial segregation that deeply divided society. Jim Crow laws, especially in the South, imposed a rigid separation between whites and blacks in almost every aspect of public life. African Americans were forced to attend separate schools, use separate bathrooms, and even sit in specific areas on public transportation. Discrimination was not only legal but also cultural, with prejudice ingrained in virtually every sphere of society. This was a time of constant injustice and violence. Lynchings and assaults were common, and African Americans lived in constant fear of reprisal for challenging the status quo. This scenario of oppression, however, planted the seeds of resistance. Groups of activists began to organize and protest peacefully, calling for justice. Amid this maelstrom of segregation and despair, a young pastor emerged as one of the most powerful voices in this struggle. Martin Luther King Jr., with his ideal of racial equality, was beginning to gain prominence, being seen by many as the hope of a new era. Martin Luther King Jr. was born on January 15, 1929, in Atlanta, Georgia, into a deeply religious family. His father, Martin Luther King Sr., was a Baptist minister and civil rights advocate, and his mother, Alberta Williams King, was a teacher. From an early age, King was exposed to the values of equality, justice, and love for others, values that would accompany him throughout his life. His childhood was marked both by the influence of his church and by the injustices he witnessed in the daily life of the segregated society of the southern United States. One of the first events that shaped his view on racial segregation was when, as a child, he was forbidden to play with two white friends because of the color of their skin. This incident left a deep impression on him, awakening in him the awareness of the cruelty of racism. In school, King was a brilliant student, and his intelligence led him to enroll at Morehouse College, a historically African-American university, at the age of 15. It was there that he decided to follow in his father's footsteps and become a minister. But King was more than just a preacher. During his studies, he was influenced by many figures, most notably Mahatma Gandhi and his concept of peaceful resistance. By the time he completed his doctorate in theology at Boston University, King was ready to apply these ideas to the racial injustices in the United States. His vision went beyond religious barriers. He believed that through love and nonviolence, a divided nation could be transformed. And so, with a brilliant mind and a dedicated soul, Martin Luther King Jr. was on the verge of leading one of the greatest social revolutions of the 20th century. On December 1, 1955, a seemingly simple event in Montgomery, Alabama, would change the course of history. Rosa Parks, an African-American seamstress, refused to give up her seat on a bus to a white man, as required by segregation laws at the time. Her arrest sparked outrage among Montgomery's black community. It was then that local leaders, inspired by her courage, decided to organize a boycott of the city's bus system, a form of peaceful protest against racial segregation in public transportation. Martin Luther King Jr., who at the time was a young 26-year-old pastor, was chosen to lead the movement. With his charisma, oratory skills, and unwavering conviction in nonviolence, King quickly rose to prominence. The boycott lasted more than a year, during which African Americans in Montgomery refused to use city buses, opting instead to walk or organize carpools. The peaceful resistance was met with harsh repression. King was arrested, his house was bombed, and he received numerous death threats. However, King remained steadfast in his commitment to nonviolence, preaching that love and justice would prevail over hate. His leadership and the community's determination eventually yielded results. In 1956, the U.S. Supreme Court declared Montgomery's bus segregation laws unconstitutional. This triumph marked King's rise as a national civil rights leader and inspired other movements across the country. The Montgomery struggle was the spark that ignited a revolution, and Martin Luther King Jr. became the central figure in this fight for racial equality. From his experience in the Montgomery boycott, Martin Luther King Jr. solidified his belief in the philosophy of nonviolence. Inspired by the teachings of Mahatma Gandhi, King embraced an approach of nonviolent resistance as the only moral and effective path to achieving justice. For King, nonviolence was not simply a strategy but a principle of life. He believed deeply that love and compassion could overcome hatred, and that peace was not only the ultimate goal but also the means by which freedom and equality would be achieved. King knew that by meeting hatred with violence, his movement would lose moral legitimacy and alienate public support. Instead, he called on his followers to resist provocations with dignity and courage, even when they faced police brutality, arbitrary arrests, and physical attacks. This commitment to peace did not come easily. Many activists within the civil rights movement, frustrated by the slow pace of change, pressed for more aggressive action. But King remained steadfast in his conviction. He saw nonviolence as an active force, capable of transforming not only laws but also the hearts and minds of oppressors. It was a spiritual battle as much as a political one. King believed that love could not only overcome hatred but also redeem the oppressors themselves. This philosophy would become the core of his leadership, guiding the civil rights movement through moments of triumph and challenge. On August 28, 1963, the world witnessed one of the most iconic moments in civil rights history, the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. More than 250,000 people of all races, religions, and backgrounds peacefully gathered on the National Mall in front of the Lincoln Memorial in a powerful act of unity and resistance against injustice. The march was organized by several civil rights organizations, but it was Martin Luther King Jr. who stole the show with a speech that would resonate for generations. With the sun shining down on the crowd, King took the podium and began his speech, initially focusing on demands for economic and social equality. However, as he continued, King became overcome with the emotion of the moment and strayed from his prepared notes. It was then that he uttered the words that would forever be etched into the collective memory. "I have a dream." With his powerful voice, he painted a vision of a future where black and white children would play together, where their children would not be judged by the color of their skin but by the content of their character. The "I have a dream" speech transcended politics. It was more than a call for civil rights. It was a declaration of hope and faith in humanity. King's words touched the souls of all present and echoed around the world, transforming the moment into a universal symbol of the struggle for justice and equality. The march, and especially King's speech, became a powerful catalyst for the advancement of the civil rights movement, leading to the passage of landmark legislation in the years to come. That day in Washington was not only a milestone in King's career, but also in the history of the United States, forever changing the course of the struggle for civil rights. Following the success of the March on Washington, Martin Luther King Jr. became a global icon of the struggle for civil rights. However, with his growing visibility came new challenges. While the march and the "I have a dream" speech strengthened the movement, the reality behind the scenes was more complex. Within the civil rights movement itself, divisions emerged between those who supported King's peaceful approach and others who, frustrated with the slow pace of change, advocated more radical methods. The passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was a major victory, but King knew that true equality was still a long way off. Poverty and structural racism continued to plague millions of African Americans. In response, King began to broaden his focus to advocate for economic justice as well. He began to lead anti-poverty campaigns and openly criticized the Vietnam War, believing that the resources spent on the conflict could be used to improve living conditions in the United States. However, this broadening of his agenda brought criticism not only from his traditional enemies, but also from former allies. Many questioned his involvement in issues outside the direct struggle for race. Still, King remained true to his principles, believing that the struggle for racial, economic, and social equality were interconnected. But opposition from both within and outside the movement grew, and King faced increasing pressure as he continued his quest for justice. On April 4, 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. was tragically assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee, while there to support a garbage collection workers' strike, a movement that symbolized his fight for economic justice. The gunshot that took his life, fired by an as-yet unidentified gunman, echoed across the country and the world, leaving a wave of shock and grief. King, a man who had dedicated his life to promoting peace, equality, and love, was silenced, but his legacy was far from over. News of his death sparked protests and riots in several American cities, where grief and frustration turned to anger and despair. Cities like Washington, D.C., and Chicago saw their streets filled with demonstrations, reflecting the fury of a nation that had lost one of its greatest civil rights advocates. The international community's reaction was equally intense, with leaders around the world expressing their condolences and solidarity. King's assassination not only cut short a promising life, but also left a profound void in the civil rights movement. However, his death was not in vain. He had planted the seeds of change, and the fight for racial and social justice would continue. At his funeral, thousands gathered to honor his legacy, vowing to carry on the fight for equality. Martin Luther King Jr.'s life and work became a beacon of hope for all who fought against oppression, inspiring future generations to continue his mission. Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy transcends his time, with his words and actions resonating to this day, inspiring people around the world to fight for justice, equality, and human rights. After his death, the civil rights movement faced significant challenges, but the principles King espoused continued to guide the struggle. His philosophy of nonviolence, emphasis on love, and belief in human dignity became cornerstones of resistance against oppression. Emerging leaders such as Jesse Jackson and Andrew Young continued the fight, invoking King's spirit in their campaigns. In 1983, President Ronald Reagan signed into law Martin Luther King Jr. Day as a national holiday, formally recognizing his contributions to American society. The day not only commemorates his life, but also serves as a reminder of the ongoing struggle for racial justice. Schools, streets, and monuments in his honor have sprung up across the country, solidifying his place in American history. King's impact also extended beyond the borders of the United States. His ideas about nonviolence and social justice influenced human rights movements around the world, from South Africa to India, where his philosophies were adapted by leaders such as Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu. King's principles continue to guide contemporary struggles, including campaigns against police brutality, discrimination, and economic inequality. In a world that continues to struggle with racial and social divisions, Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy is more relevant than ever. His teachings remind us that the struggle for a more just and equitable world is a shared responsibility, and that each of us can make a difference. King's dream lives on, not only in the words he spoke, but in the ongoing actions of all those who seek justice and equity. If you were inspired by Martin Luther King Jr.'s incredible journey and the power of fighting for justice, don't forget to like and share this video with your friends. Together, we can spread the message of love, equality, and hope that he left us. Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories and activate the bell so you don't miss our next content. The fight for a better world continues, and each one of us can make a difference. Let's keep King's legacy alive, and together make this vision a reality.